Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Custom Spray Mods. Now in this video I'm going to show you an easy way to strip paint from your panels. I've got this car, the roof is all cracked and faded, the paint is in really bad condition. So we need to use Paint Stripper to get rid of all that product and start again. So in this video I'm going to show you an easy way to use Paint Stripper. Should be good? Check it out. So why do we need to use Paint Stripper? Why can't we just sand it back and apply primer and then paint and clear? Well, if you sand this back and just smooth it out, then basically you're just painting over a damaged surface. So this has been affected by the sun, the clear coat's damaged, the paint and the primer has all been affected by the sun. So if we just sand that smooth, put new primer and paint and clear on top of that, then basically you're painting over an infected surface. So it's going to become defective again in the future. So you want to get rid of all that product and start again so you don't have this problem again in a year or 2 years or later down the track. So yeah, going to use some Paint Stripper. I'm going to use Bodyfix Automotive Paint Stripper. This stuff does the job really well. So I'm going to put that on top of the paint, let it sit for a while, scrape it off, I'll be ready to move on. So the first thing I'm going to do is mask up all the parts that I don't want Paint Stripper to get on, all the rubbers, things like that. Then I'm going to mask up a little bit over the edge of the paint. So I still have a little bit of paint because I don't want Paint Stripper to get into those rubbers or edges. So I'm going to leave probably about 1 centimeter of paint around the edge of the panel, and then I'll just sand that off later. Now I'm going to give the paint a quick sand with 80 grit sandpaper, and that is going to help the Paint Stripper bite into the paint and really be extremely effective. Now I'm going to mask the surrounding parts with a plastic. This is just a masking plastic that folds out to about 1.2 meters. So I'm going to use that to protect the rest of the panels. So the panel is cleaned, it's been masked up and sanded with 80 grit sandpaper, so we're ready to start putting some Paint Stripper on. Now I'm going to pour the Paint Stripper all over the roof of the car, making sure to get it on nice and thick. And you can see I'm wearing a mask and gloves and a protective jacket. Basically you don't want to get this stuff on your skin and you don't want to really breathe it in, so make sure you're in a well ventilated area and you'll be safe. Now that the Paint Stripper is on nice and thick, I'm going to lay the plastic over the panel and basically seal it up with the plastic. And this is going to help all the fumes from the Paint Stripper. It's going to help it attack the paint and basically lift it off the surface. So this is just a great trick. Basically with Paint Stripper, you want to try and keep it moist and not let it dry up. So do it in cooler weather, try not to do it in direct sunlight, and try not to let it dry onto your panel. By putting plastic over it really helps keep the fumes and really helps keep it wet, and is a great way to use Paint Stripper. Now I'm going to leave it like this for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then I'll come back and pull the plastic off. As you can see, the plastic is removing most of the paint. So all we need to do now is get a paint scraper and scrape the rest off. It really doesn't take much effort at all to get the rest of the paint off, but if there are bits that didn't come off properly, then you can just apply more Paint Stripper, cover it with plastic, and just go through the process again. Now I'm just going to use a wet rag and wipe the rest of the residue off the panel. Check that out, it's all the paint. Just chuck it in the bin. Now we've stripped most of the paint off, I'm just going to mask up all the edges and use a disc sander with 180 grit sandpaper and sand the rest of the paint off those edges. Okay, so we've paint stripped the roof, we've cleaned all the paint stripper off, and we've sanded all our edges. Now, here's a really important step. You need to clean the surface with a deoxidine or a metal conditioner. Could be also called rust converter. But basically, this is going to remove any residue from the paint stripper. So if you just clean with water or wax and grease remover or paint thinners, that's not going to get that residue off. You need to use this metal conditioner, something like that, to get rid of that paint stripper, because it can cause a reaction with your primer and paint. Maybe not straight away, but definitely down the track. So I've got a bucket of clean water down here with some clean rags in it. And up here I've got some rags and I've got my metal conditioner. I'm basically just going to pour this on the metal surface and rub it in and pretty much wash it off straight away. You don't really need to let it sit there for a long time. And I might just do half the roof and I'm just putting a nice even coat, and it kind of starts to react instantly. Get my wet rag and wash it off. It's just getting rid of any contamination that paint stripper has left. Now I'm going to sand the whole panel with 240 grit dry sandpaper, and then I'll be ready for my next step. Now, this is just a test kind of car that we got for free, so I'm just mucking around on it. But if you're painting something that you really care about, you want to try and remove as much as you can. So remove all your rubbers and your any kind of attachments that are like in the way of painting. Sometimes masking up doesn't really get the best job, so yeah, I'm doing it on this car because I don't really care about it. But if you've got a good car, then try and remove as much as you can. Okay, so the paint was in bad condition. We used paint stripper, we stripped all the paint off. Now I'm down to the bare metal. Then I used a metal conditioner to clean the metal and get rid of any contamination from that paint stripper. Then I sanded it with 240 grit sandpaper to allow my new paint or primer to stick. So I've got a bare metal surface ready for the primer. Now I need to choose what primer to use. So because I have bare metal, I need an etch primer or a primer that goes direct to metal. So I'm going to use either a 1K etch or an epoxy primer, something like that. Now you want to choose the primer that kind of goes with your top coats. So if you're doing a 1K acrylic top coat, then you can use a 1K primer. If you want to spray a 2K top coat, like a 2-pack clear, then you should use a 2-pack primer. So something like a 2K etch primer, then high build primer, then color and clear. Or you could use a epoxy primer. So yeah, there's a few different options. Make sure you use the correct primer that suits your top coats. So I'm going to use epoxy primer on this roof. Epoxy primer can go direct to metal. Some epoxy primers have a build to it as well. That's just going to help level the surface. It has rust inhibitors in it and it can seal the metal. And epoxy primer is also non-porous. So that means you can apply the primer, leave it for a few months or a year or so, and it won't absorb water and it won't rust from underneath. So that's a bit of a benefit of the epoxy primer. Now if you have dents or repairs, what you can do is you can paint epoxy primer onto your bare metal surface, and that's going to seal the metal and stop it from rusting. Then once that primer is dry, then you can give it a light sand and apply body filler on top of your primer. And that way you know that your body filler is going onto a nice sealed surface, rather than bare metal where water or moisture can go under that repair. applying a coat of epoxy primer first is a great way to seal your metal and do your repairs on top of that. I've got this masked up, clean with wax grease remover, I'll be ready to go. At this stage, you want to try not to touch the metal with your bare hands or your skin, because you can transfer contamination from your hands onto the metal, and that can come through your paint and your primer. So be careful of that. Now the EP41 comes in white, grey or black. I've got black here, so I'm just going to use that. And the mixing ratio is 4:1. So that's 4 parts primer to 1 part hardener. Now what you can do, if you don't have any repairs and you're just using this primer as like a surfacer, so you just want to seal the metal and then basically give it a quick sand and then paint, well, you can add some thinners to it, some 2K thinners up to 30%. It's going to make the primer thinner, and that's basically going to make it easier to sand because you'll get less peel in your primer. So it'll go on smoother, it'll seal the surface, make it easier to sand once it's dry.
Now I'm using a 2mm spray gun at about 35 psi and applying 3 even coats, waiting about 10 to 15 minutes between coats. Because I'm using 2-pack and there are harmful chemicals in the mix, that means you really should do it with a spray booth and using a correct spray mask. If you don't have this equipment, then maybe it's an idea to use the 1K acrylic options. Now I'm going to let this air dry for about 2 to 3 days, and then I can sand it with my 400 grit dry sandpaper and start applying my colour.
Well, there you go. The roof of this car was all faded, sun damaged, the clear coat was wrecked, and the paint and the primer was all infected. So we used paint stripper, stripped all that paint completely off. Using the plastic made it really easy to get that paint off once it was all stripped. So yeah, once we did that, we used a metal conditioner to get rid of any contamination left over from the paint stripper. Then we were able to sand it with 240 grit dry sandpaper and apply an epoxy primer. And the epoxy primer will seal the metal, stop it from rusting, and it'll, once we sand it, it'll allow our new paint to stick straight to it. And we can do that in a few days. So we'll let that dry. This epoxy primer takes quite a long time to dry, so it's not something you can leave overnight. Probably leave it about 2 or 3 days to dry before you start sanding it. But otherwise, if we've got any repairs, it'll go over the epoxy primer. Otherwise, we can just paint straight over it. So all these products are available from the website. You can check out the links in the description if you want to buy anything that I've used today, the cover masker, the epoxy primer or the paint stripper. If you're in Australia, it's really easy. If you're overseas, you might have to find a local auto shop to find this stuff. But otherwise, links in the description so you can fix your car. And if you've got a faded clear coat or faded paint, then this is the best way to fix it. So yeah, hope that helps. See you next time.